What happens when a family seals itself off so completely that the only marriages left occur within its own walls? During the mid-9th century, one farmstead stood in silence, its doors were closed, its records nearly erased. At the center stood a brother, Elias H., who would take as his wife each of his 4 sisters. One by one, they died. Their graves were disturbed, their names crossed out in a ledger that still survives. No explanations, no heirs, only silence and the unsettling rumors that lingered long after the house fell into ruin. You are watching The Fiery Night, where we unearth the most disturbing histories that others tried to bury. Tell us in the comments where in the world you are watching this story from, and at what hour. And if you want more tales of families, of secrets, and of the shadows they leave behind, subscribe and let the ledger remain open. Some families close their doors for privacy. Others close them to bury what lives inside. At the edge of a sparsely settled county, bordered on 3 sides by pine thicket and on the 4th by marshland, stood the H farmstead. Its boundaries were both physical and social. Neighbors rarely crossed its fences, and when they did, they remarked on the silence. No laughter of children, no voices in the yard, only the faint rhythm of tools against soil. Census takers, tasked with documenting even the most scattered households, recorded a striking omission. The H family appeared without any neighbors listed within 3 miles. Church records, equally meticulous, showed baptisms and burials, yet never a marriage outside the household. The family line appeared as if sealed, a closed loop, feeding only upon itself. The father, once the figure who signed land agreements and livestock inventories, began to vanish from records without explanation. The last mention was a debt note filed at the courthouse, signed in a hand that faltered mid-stroke. After that, no burial, no obituary, no acknowledgement. His absence left a vacuum, one that was quickly filled by his eldest son, Elias. For Elias's ascension, no ceremony was required. He simply stepped into the role, his name replacing his father's on crop ledgers, on tax rolls, and on supply orders. His handwriting appeared sharper, heavier, the pen pressed down as if to ensure permanence. Those who dealt with him in the county seat remarked on his composure, deliberate, silent, never revealing more than what a signature required. The sisters, by contrast, faded into silence. Their names existed only as faint traces, initials on a church pew list, a few purchases noted at the general store. No one remembered them walking in town. No one could say they had seen them past the farm gates. Some suggested Elias forbade it. Others believed they forbade it themselves. Either way, the farmstead grew into a sealed chamber, cut off from the currents of ordinary life. Rumors emerged, though not in official records. Hunters crossing the woods claimed to hear voices in the night, the kind of murmurs that sounded like prayer or argument, but carried no words. Farm hands hired briefly for harvest said the doors to the main house were locked from within, opened only by Elias himself. He dealt in business without warmth, never inviting a worker inside for food or drink. By the year following the father's disappearance, the farm's identity had shifted entirely. It was no longer the H family farm in the plural sense. It was Elias H's farm, with others in the household listed beneath his authority, dependent, unnamed, reduced to shadows under a single head of record. The pattern, once set, would never shift again. The farmstead separation hardened into permanence. Its doors closed not merely against intrusion, but against exposure. The community surrounding it would learn to speak of the H family only in whispers, noting their silence as much as their absence. And within those borders, Elias stood as both master and gatekeeper, the last visible man in a house already beginning to swallow its own history. Her marriage lasted 3 winters. Her grave lasted longer. With the father's absence sealed in silence, Elias assumed not only the fields, but also the household. Parish ledgers show that within a season of his father's vanishing, Elias entered into marriage with his eldest sister, Miriam. The entry is faint, reduced to a single line. Elias H., wedded to Miriam H. No witnesses are named, no congregation recorded. It was a marriage that bore the structure of legality but not the presence of community. The villagers whispered, but no law intervened. Rural parishes, burdened by distance and scarcity, often permitted arrangements that skirted propriety. Yet in this case, the omission was glaring. No banns published, no priest officiating. Only Elias's signature on a folded sheet returned to the courthouse marked the union as official. Miriam's name thereafter vanished from public registers, folded into her brother's. Life on the farm appeared unaltered to the outside eye. The fields were tilled, livestock traded, debts recorded on time. But Miriam was seldom seen. When she did appear briefly at the edge of the property or crossing to the well, neighbors noted her pale demeanor, her face turned downward. No children came of the marriage. No celebrations marked anniversaries. Only the daily silence of the household deepened. 3 winters passed before her death was entered. The cause was noted in parish records with unsettling vagueness. Lung fever. The phrase, used loosely in the mid-century, could mean pneumonia, influenza, or any wasting illness. No physician's name accompanies the entry. No coroner's note follows. Miriam's death appears as a line without elaboration, as if the parish itself were hesitant to acknowledge the detail. Her burial carried equal secrecy. No priest presided. No procession moved through the village lanes. Instead, a grave was dug behind the barn, shallow and unmarked, known only by the disturbed earth and a wooden plank driven into the soil. Farmers passing by claimed to hear the sound of spades in the night, though none dared approach. By dawn, the mound was sealed. The unease spread quickly. While Elias continued his dealings in town with composure, whispers followed him. Families crossing paths with him in the marketplace shifted their gaze. The absence of ritual, no bells, no prayers, no mourning cloth, gave Miriam's death a weight heavier than illness alone. It seemed less a passing than an erasure. Court records confirmed no objections were ever filed. No investigation was made. The law, distant and indifferent, allowed the matter to settle like dust upon neglected shelves. Miriam, once eldest daughter, then wife, then widow in silence, was reduced to absence. No letters survive. No possessions are marked. No testimony lingers. Only a shallow grave and a line in the parish book bear her name. And yet for years afterward the villagers swore the soil behind the barn shifted with the seasons, as if her resting place, denied the rites of burial, refused to remain still. In the months following Miriam's burial, Elias assumed yet another role. That of husband to Ruth, the second sister. The shift appeared seamless, as though the household required continuity more than propriety. Parish registers noted the marriage with the same sparseness as before. Elias H. joined to Ruth H. The lack of witnesses again marked the union as one conducted in silence under the same roof without intrusion from neighbors or clergy. What stands out in the surviving records is not the marriage itself, but the sudden expansion of land rights. County property ledgers show several parcels transferred under Ruth's name, a strategic maneuver that suggested Elias sought to consolidate the estate, binding the sisters' identities into the soil itself. The handwriting, firm and deliberate, was Elias's. Ruth's mark appears as little more than a trembling cross at the bottom of the page, as if compelled rather than volunteered. Her presence in the village remained minimal. Neighbors spoke of glimpses at the window or fleeting figures at the well, but never conversation, never direct acknowledgement. By the following spring, Ruth's name shifted from property ledgers to death registers. The cause, accident with the cattle. The phrasing raised unease. Farm accidents were not uncommon, yet they bore distinctive traces. Crushed limbs, torn clothing, bruises consistent with hooves and horns. In Ruth's case, those who claimed to have seen her body noted something dissonant. She bore no broken bones, no marks of trampling, only a pallor and stillness inconsistent with violence. Her dress remained intact, as though she had merely lain down in the dirt and ceased to breathe. The explanation offered by Elias carried the weight of authority. He reported that the cattle had spooked, driving Ruth to the ground. With no physician summoned, no coroner's inquest pursued, the record was sealed. The grave, like Miriam's, was dug near the outbuildings, unblessed and unmarked. Among villagers, the unease grew sharper. Two sisters married to the same brother, dead within years of each other, both dispatched with vague diagnoses. The whispers multiplied but stopped short of formal accusation. To speak such matters aloud was to court scandal and danger. Silence was easier, and silence is what the community chose. Yet the pattern was visible even then. Marriage entered, property signed, death declared, each stage followed with precision like lines in a ledger written before their time. Miriam's lung fever, Ruth's cattle accident, both vague enough to evade scrutiny, both quick enough to erase the possibility of heirs. By the year's end, Elias's authority deepened. He remained the sole surviving male of the household, with property now further consolidated under his command. The sisters' graves lay in disturbed earth, their presence erased from daily life. And still the farmstead remained sealed. No visitors entered, no laughter escaped, only the sense that a ritual was repeating itself, an unnatural cycle marked not by life's continuity, but by the steady disappearance of those bound closest to him. By the second winter after Ruth's death, neighbors began to notice disturbances in the ground behind the barn. The graves, once raised mounds of soil with crude markers, appeared unsettled. Wooden planks that once stood as makeshift headboards tilted, sank, and then disappeared entirely. At first, villagers attributed the shifting earth to frost and thaw. Rural burials were shallow, and animals often disturbed the soil. Yet, those who passed close enough, farm hands hired briefly, hunters crossing the property line at dusk, whispered of something stranger. The ground seemed reworked, as though spades had turned it deliberately, not once, but repeatedly, until the mounds themselves dissolved into flat earth. When Miriam's grave was examined in passing, no coffin appeared beneath. The soil caved inward, revealing nothing but empty clay. The same was true of Ruth's. The coffins, if they had ever been there, were gone. Some whispered Elias had removed them under cover of night, carting them away to some secret place on the property. Others suggested he had never placed them there at all, burying only the illusion of a grave to quiet suspicion. No official complaint was filed. In such remote communities, the dead belonged to their families, and the church seldom intervened unless called. Parish records make no mention of exhumations, no transfer of remains. Yet the rumors spread in tight circles, that Elias unearthed his sisters and hid them in the house, that the coffins were moved to the marsh, or even that the barn itself became a vault beneath its foundation. The gradual erasure of markers deepened the sense of erasure. Where two mounds once stood, grass grew evenly, indistinguishable from the surrounding pasture. New laborers brought in for harvest asked where the graves were only to be told that no graves existed. The silence was deliberate, cultivated as carefully as Elias's fields. County records decades later would note the anomaly. A map of the property drawn during a land dispute shows an altered burial ground, an area behind the barn marked with dotted lines, annotated by a surveyor who noted no visible markers though soil indicates prior use. The phrase became the closest thing to evidence that Miriam and Ruth were ever interred there at all. Among the community, the unease hardened into resignation. The grave's disappearance became one more subject never spoken of directly, yet never forgotten. Parents warned children not to wander near the farm, claiming the earth there swallowed what was placed upon it. For Elias, the removal, whether real or perceived, consolidated the silence. The farmstead bore no visible dead, only the living figure of the brother himself. The absence of graves erased memory, leaving nothing but rumor to preserve the sisters' names. By the time spring returned, the burial ground behind the barn was indistinguishable from the rest of the fields. Bare earth had become pasture, and the silence around it was as complete as if the women had never lived at all. The union of Elias and Esther, the third sister, is recorded only through absence. Parish registers for the year contain a blank line where her ceremony should be. The scribe left space as though awaiting details that never arrived. No witnesses, no banns, no priest's signature. A marriage acknowledged only by silence. Esther's presence in the farmstead was even more confined than her sister's before her. Neighbors reported never seeing her outside the farmhouse after the wedding. Unlike Miriam, who had once walked the yard, or Ruth glimpsed at the well, Esther appeared only behind curtained windows. Some remarked on movement, a figure passing across glass in lamplight, but never her face, never her voice. Court ledgers show no property transfers under Esther's name. Unlike Ruth, whose identity was tied to land, Esther left no such trace. Her existence after marriage rests only in rumor and in the sudden entry of her death, unaccompanied by explanation. The discovery came in unsettling form. A farm hand sent to deliver supplies reported that the door to the main parlor had been sealed from within. When the room was eventually opened, Esther's body lay upon the bed, dressed as if prepared for burial. Her hands were folded, her hair arranged neatly over her shoulders. The scene bore none of the chaos of sudden illness or violence. It resembled instead a tableau set in place by deliberate hands. Elias explained to those who questioned that she had passed peacefully in her sleep. No physician was summoned. No coroner's report survives. Her name entered the death register with a line so sparse it borders on omission. Esther H., deceased. Natural causes, the handwriting is the parish clerk's, but witnesses swore the information had been provided by Elias himself without verification. The absence of a coroner's record is telling. Even in rural districts, unexplained deaths typically received at least a cursory examination. For Esther, nothing. No record of illness, no account of care, no burial notice filed by church or county. Only the word of the brother husband, and a burial conducted in secrecy. Villagers spoke of the locked room in hushed tones. Some claimed the shutters had been nailed shut for months before her death, that Esther had been confined and unseen. Others suggested she had wasted away in silence, reduced to little more than a shadow moving within the house. Whether she suffered illness, neglect, or deliberate confinement remains unrecorded. Her grave, if dug, left no trace. Parish land maps show no new burials in the year of her passing. The earth behind the barn, once marked by shifting mounds, was by then indistinguishable pasture. Esther's body vanished into that same ambiguity, either consumed by soil already disturbed or hidden elsewhere within the property. By the time the year closed, Esther's existence was reduced to rumor and a blank line in the register. The household, once containing 4 sisters, had narrowed to 1, and Elias, now thrice widowed without leaving the farmstead, stood alone at the center of a silence that no witness could break. The farm ledger that revealed the story did not come to light until decades later, long after the house had fallen into ruin and the land changed hands. It was uncovered in the county archive, misfiled among tax receipts and forgotten inventories. The ledger itself was plain, bound in worn leather, its spine cracked, its pages brittle with age. What drew attention was not its existence, but what it recorded. On the first pages, Elias's neat script accounted for harvest yields, livestock tallies, and debts repaid. The handwriting was steady, controlled, the marks of a man intent on precision. Yet midway through the book, the purpose of the ledger shifted. A list appeared, written not in columns of grain and cattle but in names. The first, Miriam H., beside it a date of marriage. Then a date of death. The line was crossed through, firm and deliberate. The second, Ruth H. Again a marriage date followed by a death date, struck through in the same ink, though the hand pressed harder, the paper torn faintly where the nib dug deep. The third, Esther H. Her name was shakier, the letters wavering. The date of death appeared blurred, overwritten twice as though Elias had hesitated before finishing the stroke, crossed out nonetheless. The fourth, Leah H., the youngest sister. Her entry bore no marriage date, only her name written beside Elias's, followed by a space. Then, lower on the page, a death date hastily scrawled. The line that crossed it out was crooked, uneven, and stained at the edges, as though the ink had bled with sweat or trembling hands. Each entry bore the unmistakable progression of a man unraveling. The control of the first gave way to the instability of the last. The ledger, meant for record-keeping, had become instead a private testament, an accounting not of harvests, but of lives taken into his authority and extinguished in turn. What unsettles researchers is the silence between the lines. No mention of causes, no notes of births, heirs, or possessions passed on, only the stark pattern. Wife, sister, date of union, date of death. Each one struck through, erased by Elias's own hand, as though his role was not only to bind them, but to obliterate them. The discovery in the archive raised questions without answers. Why had the ledger been preserved at all? Was it surrendered with his estate or hidden by a later occupant of the farm? The archivist who found it described a heaviness in turning its pages, the sense of handling an object never meant for public record. In its final pages, the handwriting collapsed entirely into near illegibility. Figures scrawled at angles, sums abandoned mid-column, ink blotting where the pen lingered too long. The neat script that had once calculated livestock and grain was reduced to fragments, like a mind breaking beneath the weight of its own repetitions. The ledger remains the only surviving document that names all four sisters together. Miriam, Ruth, Esther, Leah. Each one written, each one crossed out. Their graves are gone, their records erased, but their names endure in a single book, where silence itself becomes the loudest entry. Leah H., scarcely past girlhood when her father vanished, had remained the most unseen of the four sisters. While Miriam carried the dignity of eldest, Ruth the task of property transfers, and Esther the quiet shadow behind locked shutters, Leah was remembered only in fragments, a soft voice overheard at the well, a fleeting figure in the barn doorway. She became Elias's fourth wife in what was by then a pattern, a cycle spoken of only in whispers. Parish records fail entirely at this stage. No line is written for Leah's marriage. The clerk who left a blank space for Esther's ceremony did not attempt one for Leah. In the census that followed, the farmstead listed only Elias H., household of 5 reduced to 2 without naming who the second was. That second line soon disappeared altogether, leaving Elias alone on paper. Her death was never entered. No priest noted burial rites. No county coroner signed a certificate. No grave was dug in sight of neighbors. Yet villagers swore they saw her after she should have been gone. They spoke of the upstairs window, its curtains drawn but never fully closed. At dusk, a pale figure appeared there, motionless, watching. Hunters cutting through the woods at night described lamplight glowing from the second floor, long after Elias himself had ceased to be seen outside. Some claimed Leah lived on in confinement, hidden in the house until wasting away. Others whispered she had died early, and Elias, unwilling or unable to let go, kept her remains within those sealed rooms. Still others, more fearful, insisted it was not her body that remained, but her shadow, the youngest sister bound to the house, circling endlessly in the pane of glass. No document clarifies her end. In estate papers filed after Elias's death, there is no mention of a surviving wife, nor of her passing. The only trace is her name scratched into the ledger alongside her sister's, marked with a date of death in Elias's own hand, but no witness, no grave, no earth to hold her. The farmhouse itself seemed to confirm the ambiguity. When descendants of neighboring families dared explore its ruins decades later, they found the upstairs rooms nailed shut, doors warped with age, windows locked from within. Dust lay thick, yet footprints marked the floorboards, as if someone had moved there long after the house should have stood empty. Leah's absence remains more haunting than the others' recorded deaths. Miriam's grave vanished. Ruth's accident left contradictions. Esther's locked room suggested confinement. But Leah was swallowed entirely by record, by earth, by time. She exists only as a rumor seen through glass, a name crossed out in a ledger, a question that the house itself refused to answer. She was the youngest and she was the last. But whether she left that house in life, in death, or not at all remains a silence unbroken to this day. Across 4 marriages, not a single heir was recorded for Elias H. Neither parish baptismal books nor county census registers list children born under his name. The silence of those records is itself unusual. In rural farmsteads of the 19th century, families often grew large, each child documented by baptism, school roll, or inheritance claim. Yet the H farmstead left no such trace. Medical observers, looking back with the detachment of distance, speculated that consanguinity played its role. Brother-sister unions, even when not acknowledged openly, were known to reduce fertility and increase stillbirths. The absence of heirs from 4 successive unions suggested a closed loop of blood that yielded nothing. Sterility became a legacy as much as secrecy. But the silence was not complete. Whispers circulated that children had come into the world, only to vanish before acknowledgement. Laborers recalled, in fragments, hearing faint cries at night, the unmistakable sound of an infant carried on the wind from the farmhouse. Others claimed to have seen small shapes bundled in cloth, carried quickly across the yard toward the well. No records confirm these accounts, yet the consistency of rumors across decades gave them weight. In the years after Elias's death, when the property lay untended, the soil around the well was disturbed during plowing. Farmers noted fragments that were not stone. Small bones, brittle and discolored, surfaced in the furrows, too small for livestock. They were gathered and reburied without inquiry. No coroner investigated. No priest blessed the ground. The matter was left unspoken, folded into the larger silence of the household. The H family legacy was both factual and spectral. On paper, Elias died, leaving his estate to dissolve in county dispute. No children came forward to claim name or property. Yet in memory, the suggestion of hidden births and of hidden burials lingered. The absence of official acknowledgement only sharpened the suspicion that something had been deliberately effaced. Forensic analysis was never attempted. The fragments found were too few, too scattered, already lost to time and soil. What remains are reports preserved in local testimony. A rusted crib discovered in the barn loft, its mattress blackened with mildew. Swaddling cloths found stuffed into a wall cavity, matted with age and damp. Objects without names, suggestive but inconclusive. The farmstead silence thus became twofold: no heirs to continue the line, and no graves to mark those who may have come and gone unseen. The house remained barren, both in life and in record, producing nothing but rumors and the occasional fragments surfacing in plowed earth. Elias's legacy was not continuity but interruption. His line ended with himself despite 4 marriages, despite the erasure of 4 sisters. What endured was the suspicion that beneath the soil of the farm, near the stagnant water of the well, lay the traces of children never permitted to be known. The farm remained without heirs. Yet in the silence of its fields, the absence itself became a form of presence, heavier than the cry of any child could have been. By the final decade of his life, Elias H. had become a solitary figure. The farmstead reduced to his presence alone. No laborers remained to assist in harvest. No neighbors came to lend tools or borrow grain. The household that once held father, mother, and 4 daughters had narrowed to a single occupant, who worked the fields by rote, and returned each evening to a house that grew quieter with each passing year. Census takers recorded his name without companions. The blank columns reserved for children, boarders, or servants stood empty. He listed no kin, no heirs, only the address of the farm. The handwriting on the census line was neat but unremarkable, as though even the enumerator sensed nothing lay beyond that name. The house itself bore the marks of decline. Windows went unrepaired, shutters sagged, and the roof began to sag inward where storms had split the timber. Yet Elias remained, planting the same furrows year after year, keeping accounts in ledgers that grew shorter and more erratic. What once had been lists of crops dwindled to a few terse notes: corn, 3 bushels, hogs sold. The script grew thinner, then faltered altogether. Villagers who passed by remarked on his figure in the yard, bent but steady, or seated on the porch in silence. He spoke to no one. The fields nearest the barn lay uncultivated, as though he avoided the ground where the graves had once been. Instead, he fixed his attention on that patch of earth, returning often to stand before it, unmoving, as if waiting for the soil to yield something back. When his body was found, it was discovered not in bed, but in a rocking chair placed deliberately to face the empty space behind the barn. His hands rested on the armrests, his gaze turned outward, fixed toward the ground where Miriam, Ruth, Esther, and Leah had once been buried, or pretended to be. No sign of struggle marked his passing. The chair rocked faintly in the draft from a broken window, as though refusing to remain still. His will, filed in the county courthouse, offers its own silence. No mention of wives, no reference to sisters, no heirs named, no property divided. The entire estate is left in a single phrase, to the household. The term confounded clerks, for the household consisted only of himself, and now even that had ended. The property was seized by the county for unpaid debts, the land divided and sold at auction. Thus Elias vanished from record as quietly as his sisters before him. No stone marks his burial. No family line continued his name. The only testimony left is the pattern of silence, the farmstead empty, the ledger with 4 names struck through, the graves that became indistinguishable from the field. In the end, Elias remained what he had always been, a solitary figure presiding over absence, a man with 4 wives, yet always alone. Some stories are too disturbing for records. They survive only as silence. When the matter of the farmstead was reviewed by county officials, it was closed in the briefest of terms. A family tragedy, no heirs, property absorbed, the phrase appeared in an administrative file without elaboration, as though finality could be imposed by bureaucracy alone. But even on paper, the silence was telling. None of the sisters' names appear in census records following their supposed marriages. It is as if Miriam, Ruth, Esther, and Leah were never wives, never even present, erased entirely once bound to Elias. The ledger that bore their names is the only surviving document to preserve them. Each entry crossed through with dates of death. Official records, by contrast, reduced them to nothing. The farmstead itself rotted into the earth within a generation. Roof timbers collapsed, fields overgrew, and the barn, once said to hold shallow graves, sank into mud until only fragments of stone foundation remained. County maps eventually omitted the property altogether, drawing blank pasture where once a household had stood. Yet its absence never erased the memory it left behind. Among locals, the story endured, not in archives, but in whispers. They spoke of dusk falling on the land when 4 figures were seen walking the fields in silence. Women in plain dresses, indistinct, keeping to the farthest edges of the property, always apart from one another, always circling the farmhouse, but never approaching it. The watchers claimed they moved without sound, their forms paling into the haze of twilight, as if bound to repeat some ritual of distance. Some dismissed the tales as rural superstition, a story told to children to keep them from wandering near the abandoned farm. Yet the accounts remained consistent. Even decades apart, those who lived in the vicinity spoke of seeing the same thing. For shadows keeping vigil over soil that no longer marked their graves. The farmhouse itself was said to remain untouched by them, avoided, shunned, as though it held the origin of what tethered them to the earth. No formal investigation was ever conducted into these reports. Folklore rarely invites the pen of the archivist, but in its silence, the county record leaves space for them, as though the absence of detail became an opening for what could not be admitted aloud. Today, the land lies indistinguishable from the fields around it. Yet its boundaries remain remembered. Farmers plow around the area, avoiding the center where the farmhouse once stood. Children dare one another to step into the long grass at dusk. Though few linger long, the silence there is heavy, as if the air itself carries the weight of erased names and vanished graves. The family left no descendants, no monuments, no formal legacy. What remains is the impression of a household that folded inward, sealing itself until nothing could escape, not even memory, except in the form of shadows at the edge of a field. Some stories end with explanation. Others persist only as unease. The farmstead belongs to the latter. A silence preserved not by record, but by the unsettling persistence of what cannot be forgotten.